do. Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Joint City Council Economic Development Advisory Commission special meeting of September 4th, 2013. So called to order. And the second item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone wishing to make a comment on anything not on the posted agenda? We don't have a pledge today. It's not on my agenda. If it's not on my agenda, it doesn't happen. No public comment. Thank you. So this is a study session. We're going to be basically, let me sort of explain how it's going to go. At least we hope it will. Staff's going to give a report for about 15 or 20 minutes. We can ask questions of staff on the report. And then we have 5 items in the staff report that were broken down that you guys worked very hard on. And what I'd like to do is go over a little bit, maybe 10, 15, 12, 15 minutes on each one. And then at the end of that, after we talk about all those and have our ideas shared, is if there's any great burning issue that we need to add, although, as Cameron said when we were talking before, there's enough goals here to fill a good day. So, but we'll have a little time at the end if we need to. And hopefully we'll be out of here by 8 o'clock, because that's what we'd like to do. Okay, so, Mark, Mr. Sawicki. It wasn't on the agenda. Do you see a flag? Oh, wait, it's right behind you. Hey. Hey.
Maybe we can do it in closing.
Should we sing the anthem too?
Mr. Mayor, if I could suggest...
I don't think that's on.
I think it is.
Oh, now it is.
Yeah. It's just on low.
Okay.
If I may suggest, before we get to our main presentation this evening, perhaps we might start with the introductions.
Okay, great.
And I think we'll start right there.
Excellent idea, Mr. City Manager.
I'm not sure how to turn this on. So, should be on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. My name is Cameron Johnson. I'm chair of the San Carlos Economic Development Advisory Commission.
Will this work? Tom Knudsen, Economic Development Advisory Commission.
Vice chair.
That's Keith.
Oh,
Bob Farkas. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
You're killing me.
I'm a Boy Scout.
Vadim Axelrod, a new member of the EDAC.
Thank you, Vadim. Josh? Just introduce you.
Josh Leroy.
Okay, good. All right, do we need to do the council too, or? Okay, go ahead. Karen?
Karen Clapper, City Council.
Ron Collins, City Council.
Bob Griselli, City Council.
Mark Olbert, City Council.
Matt Gropat, City Council.
Al Sabay, Community Development Director. Jeff Maltby, City Manager.
Greg Rubin, City Attorney.
Crystal Moy, City Clerk.
If I had known we weren't ready, I wouldn't have started.
Having a few
Technical difficulties.
presentation. While they get that ready, just by way of background, this meeting came about back in February of 2013 as part of the city's current 6-month strategic planning process. At that meeting, the council created a 6-month objective by September 9th, 2013, to hold a joint meeting between EDAC, the Economic Development Advisory Commission, and the City Council to brainstorm ideas for the Economic Development Plan. Our Economic Development Plan was created back in 2007. It's been updated 2 or 3 times since then and continues to be something that city staff, EDAC, and the City Council work on. It contains both some shorter range objectives and some longer range objectives, as you'll see and have the opportunity to discuss this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sawicki, our Economic and Housing Manager.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. Is this working? How are you?
Not very well. It's on, yeah.
It's on, yeah?
Wait, it's not. You're talking.
Okay.
Baby Jack, forget it and talk.
And good evening, Chair and members of the Economic Development Commission. Mark Sawicki, Economic Development and Housing Manager. As the City Manager explained, this is a study session on our economic development priorities. follow tracks the staff report. We give you a background and context of what's been happening in economic development since we first adopted a 2007 plan. Some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the obstacles that we faced, and where we see it going forward, we being EDAC, because EDAC has had the pleasure of having a couple of meetings in advance of this meeting in preparation, knowing that this was on your agenda. So in terms of context and background, again, there was a 2007 Economic Development Plan. It was the first initiative like this. It had set out goals and action steps over a 3-year period. So in 2010, we decided to go back and create a new plan, a comprehensive plan with new action steps, many of which were carried over as well. And as you saw in your staff report, we gave you a little table, a little snapshot on the priorities from the 2007 plan, which is a much more ambitious plan. The tables are actually only a snapshot of some of the things that were in there, but they did illustrate the top 5 objectives of the council at the time. Those included activating the former Bell Market site, which is where Foodville moved down the block from Bianchini's. That was one of them. Utilizing the Samtrans site as a capital site, that's now the Transit Village moving forward. Activating Wheeler Plaza, which we've been working on for years. Developing a landmark site into a hotel. Again, something that you have recently seen before you again. And the other was to recruit large mid-plate retail, which was a lot more difficult than probably assumed back in 2007, although that was what most cities were trying to do, was to attract as much retail as possible for the sales tax generation. We were lucky to get the St. Paul's marketplace before the Great Recession came. In 2010, we set up a new plan, a more comprehensive plan, and to this we carried over a lot of those activities, but we added a lot more action steps in the areas of business retention and expansion and attraction and branding and marketing. Again, here we're in the middle of the recession and trying to figure out how we out-market other cities. As one person observed, when the going gets tough, it's tough to get marketing. And that was one of the things that we set out to do back then. Last year, again, this was in 2010, we set it up as a 3-year plan. And each year, since 2007, we've been coming back to the council on an annual basis and reporting on our progress and where we're headed next. And last year when we did that, we said we have all of these items in this 2010 plan. Let's go back and see which ones are the most important on a going forward basis, at least for the next year, until we come back again where we are today. We also, after the 2007 plan, realized that original plan didn't really set any hard goals or anything to measure against. So in 2008, these were brought forward as a way to measure what's happening in economic development. Ultimately, the city would like to improve its fiscal position, and that will come as a result of more economic activity, more sales tax generated by more sales activity, assessed value growing, demand for property, new development is going to create more assessed value, the city gets more property tax, and then the third element being hotel tax, TOT, transient occupancy tax. And the goal there was to actually add rooms, to develop the landmark site, get a hotel, add 100, 200 rooms, add $400,000 in revenue. What's interesting in these charts, which we're tracking from 2007, and the top two are on an index basis. It shows you where we started and where we've come to. And they're comparing the city of San Carlos against the county. That was one of the goals that we set, was to try to match the county in growth, which we've done, not in every year, but over the 6-year period, we are ahead. But the last one, the TOT growth, is very surprising because we never added a hotel. But it shows you what's happened in the hotel market with a big fallout after the recession, and now there's heavy demand again for hotel rooms. And we're seeing that we recovered that $400,000, which only goes to show that if we could add more hotel rooms, there would be significant growth in that category. some of the obstacles and constraints that we've seen. Again, the Great Recession, it's hit everybody. It forced us to have to retool and figure out what we can do going forward in economic development, what we can't. Particularly, shortly thereafter, we saw the dissolution of our redevelopment agency, which was our funding vehicle for economic development, both in putting money into projects as well as funding the economic development and our affordable housing program. So we've had to battle with that. We've had resource constraints. Every year we've been cutting staff in most years up until recently. So there wasn't any opportunity to grow our economic development resources in terms of staff or funding. And luckily we've been able to turn that tide of it. The availability of sites for development, it's very easy to say, let's go out and recruit a company, but if there isn't a place for them to go, it's very hard to have that conversation. That's the first question. What do you have for me? How big is it? Where is it? So until you create the space or have a vacancy that fits their agenda, you don't have a lot to talk about. And same thing for attraction. To bring a new business in, you're going to be able to point them in the right direction. Other lessons learned. We've learned from the industrial market. Most of San Carlos commercial area is industrial R&D type space. There's a great value to that for certain users. I think most people may drive around the east side of San Carlos and say, what is all this? I just see blank walls, but you also see a lot of activity. You see a lot of cars on the street, and we look at sales tax and we see a lot of business-to-business tax that you otherwise wouldn't know is going on over there. So these spaces have great value to the users that are there and to certain industrial users because that can't be recreated very easily in modern zoning in newer cities that don't necessarily want this dirty industrial business or so as perceived. So that's a tough thing to change in San Carlos, and the question is, do you run with it and make yourself, for example, the capital of building, construction, and materials businesses, because we have a lot of them, they fit into the character of that area, and it's something we can promote. We've learned from developers as we've tried to attract them, particularly with the original goal of trying to get more retail in San Carlos, that they really wanted large acreage, like 5 acres or more, to even so mention that they've had very good experiences with our development services and our building and planning. And that has not always been the case in San Carlos. So that is something that we should take credit for, that we have turned that around. There were times when contractors didn't want to do work in San Carlos. I talked to one of them at the home improvement showcase event from outside of our city. He doesn't work in other cities. He only wants to work in San Carlos. So, and that was an unsolicited comment. So it's something we should be proud of that we turned that around. As we've moved forward in this process at the EDEC, we talked a lot about, well, what are the values and the goals that we need to keep in mind as we move forward. It's very easy to get quickly down into action steps, but we need to think about, well, what is it we're trying to achieve here? And so some of these were expressed in those meetings, that economic development is really needed to bring revenue, jobs, and amenities for the residents to enjoy. That's why we're doing this. It needs to be consistent with community values. We're obviously not just money hungry. We're trying to find the right things, the right development, the right actions that fit with the community. And we need to be sure that we're going to capture this current upswing in the economic cycle. We're seeing a lot of interest from developers. We're seeing interest in a lot of companies that want to move up the peninsula, and we should be ready to take advantage of that. Some of the rationale that we've used in looking at what things we want to have in an economic development plan, we need to recognize that we do have limited resources, we need to prioritize, and we need to look at what kinds of things are going to maximize revenue for the city, because with those dollars we can do other things. Our analysis has showed that the most effective strategies are promoting new development of hotel, office, and retail, and in particular hotel, because those taxes go straight to the general fund. We don't have to share them with the state. We don't have to share them with other tax communities. Facilitating retention and expansion of existing businesses is a better path necessarily than attracting new companies. They're already here. You want to make them happy. You want to keep them. You want them to grow. You're going to make out a lot better with the resources you have focusing on that first. But of course, you still need to facilitate and attract new businesses who want to relocate to San Carlos or start in San Carlos. So, in the staff report, you've seen a list of what I would call suggested plan elements. There's a lot of carryover from what we've seen in previous plans. There's some additional items in there to contribute to the brainstorming that you'd like to do. I've broken them down into these categories because there's all different aspects of economic development. You can ask different economic developers what economic development is, and you're going to get a different answer from every one of them. For some, it's major real estate development, things that bring in major dollars from a large activity, and those take a very long time to happen. But then there's the day-to-day nitty-gritty retention, expansion, attraction, and promotion efforts. Talking to small businesses, finding out what their needs are, finding what makes them tick, helping brokers, property owners, businesses all figure out what's available and what can be done, and promoting San Carlos as a place to be. Ensuring adequate workforce housing. This came up at EDAC. It also came up in our business retention meetings. It is actually a charge of EDAC. There is no other body in San Carlos that deals with housing, but the charge for EDAC is to make sure there's adequate workforce housing. Without housing for the employers, they may not necessarily want to be in San Carlos or near San Carlos if they're folks who want to live here. So it is a charge. It's not something I think we want to spend a lot of time on, other than to say that it is something that I work on, that we work on in community development. And we will be doing a new housing element that's due by 2015. So these issues will be coming up over the next year. And then there's the ongoing and other administrative activities, things that we need to do to staff the EDAC, to staff the council, to report on our progress. And then the fifth category is what I call other special projects as resources allow, which is where we can do our brainstorming and say, are there other things that we should be doing, that we want to be doing, that we want to make a priority over these other things, and if so, let's dedicate resources to do so. So just quickly running through these major categories. The Catalyst projects, the landmark site. We've seen that before you earlier this year. There is a lot of activity happening on that. Every week we're talking to property owners, developers, trying to figure out how we move that ball forward. And the beauty is that the economy is turning around, and we think something is going to happen there that will all be proud of. Wheeler Plaza, we brought it as far as we could go, and we need the State Department of Finance to let us go the rest of the way. Transit Village will be coming before you soon as well. The ongoing retention, expansion, attraction, and promotion. Again, we want to continue those business outreach meetings. We want to do at least another 5. We were able to do 5 in the last year. We would like to do more, but we should do at least another 5. And then we want to conduct less formal outreach visits with just staff for the smaller businesses and get their feedback on a similar basis. We want to improve our website navigation materials so that when people come to the website, they can find what they need, they can find space, they can find what they need to get set up. Better marketing of available space, increasing the interactions with brokers and property owners and developers, and identifying where we can potentially better utilize underutilized properties. And this whole set of activities is where I am hoping the economic development coordinator will be concentrating the most. This is the sort of day-to-day, boots on the ground activities that someone can dedicate almost full time to. Third category about workforce housing, as I said, it's an issue for employers. We need to be sure that we have all types of housing in San Carlos. There's a need at all levels, at all occupational levels and income levels. We want to prepare more information on how housing actually supports economic development, because that link is never often seen, but it is out there. And in fact, we would like to get some of our larger employers to come to the table and talk about how they can help in helping us provide more There will be a housing element due by 2015. I'm suspecting that in the first quarter of 2014, we'll probably have an initial community outreach meeting to talk about housing issues. And then later in the year, we will have a more formal document and seek public comment on. That is a whole process that's prescribed by the state as to how you do a housing element, what needs to be in there. So that will be coming forward in the next year. And then and on the fourth category, the administrative. So we want to bring on board the economic development coordinator and ramping that person up. We still have to deal with the successor agency. That's something on the plate, on my plate, on the community development's plate to continue that process. We'd like to do more status updates to the council. I do a monthly update to the Economic Development Advisory Commission, and we would like to do the same to the council on a quarterly basis. We'd also like to create what's referred to as an economic development dashboard on our website, where you can quickly find vacancy rates, lease rates, unemployment rate, income levels, median home price, all of those statistics in one easy-to-find place. Those are things that developers, retailers, businesses look at when they look at a city. They like to see that those statistics. It tells them a lot about where they might want to locate. And then lastly, creating an economic development newsletter, either in an email form or as part of a resident newsletter, as well as something that would go out to the business community to better connect the city's economic development efforts with them. And then the fifth category of these are just ideas. Some of them are mine, some of them we've heard at business retention meetings, some of them we've heard from the chamber, from EDAC, or from individual council members over the last year or so. And they're in no particular order. And I'm just putting them there as food for thought as a way to kick off your race. And then lastly, I guess from a staff perspective, it would be good to get, in terms of your direction, what you would like to see come back to you, whether it's a formal plan, whether there are things that you want to prioritize today, or come back and have another opportunity at that, and to make sure that council, EDAC, and staff are all on the same page and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sawicki. Questions for Mr. Sawicki? Anybody have a question? Boy. I got one quick one. Just how was the, I mean, I was there, and some of the, I know people around this table all were there. How do you feel that building thing went on the 24th?
I think it went well, particularly as a first-time event. We were concerned, and that's one of the beautiful things that did come out of the 2017 plan was to form this economic development partnership between the chamber, EDAC, and staff, and that's who got this ball rolling very early in the year. But we were all very worried about 2 weeks before the event that we didn't have enough vendors. But the vendors came through. And from the folks that I spoke to at the event, they liked it. They were pleased. It's something to build on. We could advertise it more. We could draw in more vendors now that we've got something established and something there's a track record.
Sure. But the vendors thought it was a positive experience?
Yes.
On the whole? Okay. All right.
And we are doing vendor evaluation.
Oh, great.
So we'll get that feedback first.
Okay. Questions? No? All right. Well, I thought we might go through there's five items that Mr. Sawicki mentioned in broad terms here. We've got any comments or ideas or whatever on the 5 things? I know the Economic Development Advisory Commission's done a lot, as telling Cameron, you guys did a lot of the heavy lifting, and so.
Can I make just sort of a broader
Sure.
comment?
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate the presentation, Mark, and I think it's very reflective of the conversations that we've been having on EDAC. I just wanted to set, I think the broader contextual story here is really about the dissolution of RDA, and it's really changed. I think it's changed how we should think about economic development in San Carlos. So it used to be that redevelopment had its own separate revenue stream and it had its own separate staff, and so that meant that things that we were doing in economic development were traded off against other priorities. And so now with RDA gone, not only is there less revenue, but that revenue has to be traded off against other general fund priorities. And so every dollar spent is sort of opportunity cost against parks and streets and other things. And so I think that it means that we have to be more disciplined about it. And I think Mark did a good job about talking about a lot of the accomplishments that we've had. But I would also say that over the past 2 years or so, we've felt stretched pretty thin against all of the various really good ideas about things we could do for economic development. And so there's been an effort really since the dissolution of RDA to try to winnow down the priority list and really focus on the things that we think are going to have the biggest bang for the buck. And so I think, our overarching goal and a lot of the discussion that we had coming up to this meeting was about, driving alignment and consensus about the relatively small number of top priorities so that staff can go with the few resources they have and make sure that, and that all the economic stakeholders, be it the chamber, be it other commissions within the city, know exactly where we're going. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cameron. I think that certainly puts an absolute realistic spin on it for sure, because that's really absolutely right. It's there's not a whole pot of money anymore out there. The first item was that Mark mentioned, of course, on his 5 were the major catalyst projects: landmark site, Wheeler Plaza, Transit Village. Any comments? From anybody in the EDAC on that, or council? Yeah. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to make the observation which I made in our governance meeting the other day. With these major projects looking to come forward, I think we have some significant transit congestion type issues that we're going to have to deal with. And I hope that factors into our thinking as we are looking at these kinds of projects and costing them out.
Okay. Mr. Grocott?
2 comments. For starters, on the broader view, Cameron mentioned about the demise of the RDA, and there might be some challenges there, but on the other hand, I think one of the problems with having an RDA is it focuses you only on economic development within the RDA, which was a set geography. Now, you dispatch that idea altogether, and you can look at economic development citywide, which is what if you're going to do it, it's what it ought to be anyways. Because if you're just looking at economic development within the RDA, you're set up already for picking winners and losers. Is the business in the RDA? Is the property in the RDA? Is it not? We don't have that constraint anymore, and so I see that as a positive thing. That said, with the landmark site, I know it's we had it at EDAC, we had it at the council, it was voted on, and we came up with the new designation. But I still have strong concerns about pushing property owners around. I was with my business and work, I was into the lighting store the other day. And, I just know from talking to the owner in there, they don't want to move. They want to be able to expand their business and improve their business. And if we're going to put a mark on a property like that and constrain a property owner, I've got real issues with that. I think someone that's running a business and wants to expand it, wants to improve it, I think our goal ought to be to work with them. And I don't know what the figures are, but one thing when we talk about the TOT tax, I think one thing to keep in mind is if we gain the TOT tax, we also lose the current sales tax that's going on there, whatever those figures are. And it's not, in that case, it's not just with the lighting business, but it's with any businesses that are on that entire site. And I think that's something to keep in mind.
Okay. Mr. Albert?
Thanks. The sort of building on that a little bit, I do think that it's important that we recognize we do work with and need to work with property owners. We also have to be looking out for the good of the entire community, which I think, as Mr. Zwicky pointed out, is in large part driven by revenue generation. But that's actually the thing that I also wanted to touch on, which is, personally, I hope that we don't overly focus our efforts solely on the revenue generation side of economic development. There are quality of life issues. There are issues associated with more of our residents being able to be employed locally, for example, which might not generate any incremental revenue at all, but would be a significant improvement to quality of life. So it's a complex issue, and I hope we don't just chase one particular rabbit around the racetrack.
Kevin?
I just want to make a comment specific about the hotel and just reflect some of the conversation that we had on EDAC, and ask if the other members want to join in. Feel free to make a comment. When conversations specifically about the hotel and the strategic property acquisition reserve came up before EDAC, there was a lot of concern, consistent with what Matt said, concern about creating an environment that was not friendly for business. And we had a lot of discussion about that. We share that concern. And what I would say, the sense of EDAC is that we believe that if a hotel was built on that site, and if we could come to an agreement with the property owners, that would be a net benefit for the city. But we know that this has gone on for 20 years. And we don't know that project is actually going to happen. And it's a complex site. There's a lot of complex issues. What we are concerned about is staff having a significant portion of their bandwidth sucked into a project that never comes to fruition, and ignoring other areas of economic development where we could get some short-term gains. And what we generally have felt like we should time-bound this project so that if we are going to pursue it, and if we are going to say it's a good project, which we do think it is, that we should say, we're going to give ourselves a year, 18 months, 2 years, and if we don't see significant progress, that we reprioritize and move on to other things.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Any other comments, gentlemen?
One thing I guess I'll mention is from an accounting perspective. If you envisioned a map of the city of San Carlos.
Go ahead, Bob. You're going to need a mic. We're taping this, Bob, so recording.
If you envisioned a map of the city of San Carlos in front of us, and each parcel was listed there, particularly with respect to commercial parcels, but also residential parcels, and then you made them a different color according to how much revenue does the city get per square foot of the parcel. A hotel would be a giant light, what do they call those things?
Magnet.
Like a lighthouse.
Okay.
It'd be a lighthouse. It'd be extremely bright. And so the hotel was seen as being something that was important from a strategic perspective for the city.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
And just to sort of echo that, so I mean, it's projected that a hotel would generate about $500,000 in TOT tax per year, which is essentially we get 1% of every dollar spent in terms of sales tax revenue. So you would have to generate an additional $50 million in sales tax revenue to equal what you would get from a hotel, which and town restaurant generates about $5 million a year in revenue. So you would have to build 10 town restaurants with the level of success that they're having to equal what the revenue that the city would get from that hotel.
Okay, put it in perspective. Okay. Well, I think, why don't you guys just talk among yourselves? Go ahead, Mark.
Actually, no, that's, well, thank you. I'm trying to bring up some things beyond, I hope that we don't end up focusing the entire meeting on the hotel issue.
We're not. We're good. We got about 5 more minutes.
Right. One of the, I forget who, it may have been Cameron who made the comment that nowadays we have to, economic development investment has to compete against other opportunities for scarce funds, which is absolutely true. It's always been true to an extent. It's just when you have sequestered money, there's a threshold of stuff that as long as you're below, you don't have to worry about. I just want to say that speaking as a single council member, much as I would dislike ripping my hair out trying to figure out, do I want 3 apples or 2 oranges, I actually would love to see more stress of that kind. So in other words, to me right now, the issue is more of a dearth of things forcing us to make those investment trade-off decisions. And I'm not making that observation as a criticism, because I don't necessarily have a suggestion on how we get more of it, but if anybody is holding back because they are worried about how that trade-off process is going to create conflict among the council or whatever, please bring it on. I mean, the way to make this work is to see more investment happen. And if we have to put more money into it, well, then that's what we have to wrestle with.
Any comments on Wheeler Plaza or Transit Village? I know we haven't even seen those at Planning Commission or City Council yet, the finals. Hopefully, we can get through the state. Mark, how much more time do you think it's going to be before Wheeler would, we have a meeting tomorrow, the Oversight Board, and then it goes to the state, so?
It could be anywhere from 30 days to 90 days, I
Okay,
would say.
so theoretically, in 90 days, we'll know what we're doing in that, and with the state? Okay, thank you.
Bob?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sorry.
Um,
Can't see you through Ron, sorry.
I know, we're used to being on a circle. I just wanted to, building on what Councilmember Olbert was talking about in terms of jobs for local residents, I want to make sure we keep that balanced out, that and this builds on looking at what's happening with Wheeler Plaza and the Transit Village, that we're also looking at going back to this local workforce housing issue, that we need housing for the people who work here locally. So it's fine to provide jobs for local residents. We're also looking at a time in the city where we're getting a lot of turnover, a lot of empty nesters are leaving, we're getting new people coming in, and so to try to figure out what are the jobs we need for local residents, I think is a more difficult fit to come up with than to look at how can we improve our housing stock and the options in our housing stock in order to be able to provide housing for people who either work in town or at least don't work in the next counties to the north and the south of us.
Okay. Yeah.
Question. I'd be curious from staff if they would know, and could they create an index that we could follow on a year-to-year basis of, the so-called housing and workforce balance. Because you hear that kicked around a lot, and I know I've commented before from the dais that my impression has always been that San Carlos actually historically has done a great job with that. And in fact, you probably see, we probably are higher on the housing side than we are on the work side. And I just take that from, if you're ever out at Edgewood or Holly Street or any of our egress, outgress places in the morning and in the afternoon, what you see is more people, like in the morning, you see more people driving out on Edgewood Road and out on Holly exiting the city than you see people coming in. So that would indicate to me that we've got actually more housing than we've got jobs. But just to know, where are we, and then have it as an indicator that we can follow. It should be one of the gauges on our dashboard that we pay attention to, so that as we do development, be it economic or building-wise or whatever, we just have an idea. Are we starting to overheat? We okay? We balanced? Where are we?
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Sure. Absolutely.
I know we have limited time today. I think from an EDAC perspective, at least my perspective, it would be helpful to know what the council thinks of these general strategic priorities that Mark has presented, or those 5 larger categories, maybe before we dive down deep on each of the individual priorities underneath them. I think one thing that the Commission discussed in our last meeting as we suggested these 5 priorities or strategic areas is that the list gets pretty long, and that I think what would be most helpful is to figure out how we can prioritize this to the top few. So I'd be definitely interested to know, from a council perspective, do these 5 seem like the right areas? Is anything missing? And sort of a first take on all the individual priorities underneath them, is it anything that sticks out?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I was thinking of as I was listening to Mr. Zwickie's presentation is, and I wouldn't make it a single major category. It falls under probably the ongoing and other administrative. In my discussions with staff and property owners, a really big factor in encouraging or accelerating the turnover of property so that perhaps it might be aggregated or turned into, go to a higher use, higher value use, are tax issues, property tax issues, tax basis issues, turnovers and whatnot. It may very well be the case that there's absolutely nothing we can do about that. But as an ex-finance guy, whenever I see taxes getting in the way of something, my first reaction is I'd love to go study with some experts and say, well, what are strategies that might exist for greasing the wheels on this thing, for making it work faster, allowing turnover to take place. And again, I have no idea how that would be. I think but it might be a useful exercise for EDAC to go through is to talk to some high-level finance and tax consultants and see what strategies other municipalities may be following, or do some brainstorming about what we might do. Because it does seem to be a pretty central issue when I talk to a lot of different people about, well, why isn't that turning over? We have people who want to buy into move into San Carlos and they can't find property, and we have people who have property who, under some circumstances would be willing to sell, and it's not working. The market's not clearing.
I'm not going to skip your question. I think I want to push it a little bit toward the end. I want to go over all these, make sure we all have input to the 5 that we have, because you guys did the work. And then I think we can hopefully have a couple of minutes apiece, and I'll tell you where I stand on all this. I appreciate the question, though. Let's move on. If there's no more questions on that, let's move on to number 2, ongoing retention, expansion, attraction, promotion. Comments or questions on that? I had a quick question. Mark, do brokers, if ABC Broker Company lists property Y down on industrial, do they ever call you and say, hey, we got this listed, and know anybody that wants to buy it?
Not particularly, but we do have a LoopNet is a service that tracks that. Mm-hmm. What we do is on a periodic basis take a look at what's on LoopNet. Okay. If we see something that hadn't been on there before, then we make an inquiry as to what are they looking for, what work have they done, how can we help, and we also drive around and see if there's something that's posted that's not on LoopNet. And make sure that they put it on there, because that's a sort of the best clearinghouse that we have.
It would seem like, why wouldn't they call you? I just don't understand why. Yeah, that might be something to talk to the real Samcar about.
But part of that is just making the community a lot more aware that we are here.
Right. I think with Samcar or whomever the folks are, they just say, guys, we can help you sell this thing because we've got some ideas, or maybe have somebody that might want to buy it. So anyway, just an idea.
I know Mr. Brook had something he wanted to say, but I can answer your question for you after he's...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think the thing that came up the other day at the council retreat fits under this category. I brought up that when the State of the City was done, and I'd reached out to Greg St. Clair to speak about the restaurant businesses in San Carlos, and his comment to me when I met with him was that, and he also restated it in his address that evening, I forget now if it was a breakfast or what we did, but anyways, at the meeting we had, he said, we're in the red zone. A lot of people think we've scored a touchdown in terms of restaurant business, but we haven't. We're in the red zone, and there's things that we could do in the downtown to do even better than we're doing. And so I think there ought to be a special outreach to the restaurant industry, to folks like Greg, by the staff, and they could, I guess, share that with EDAC, and we could work on it. What was he talking about? He mentioned it, and then we haven't followed up and inquired about that. And I think that's something that we should do, is meet with, and not just Greg, although Greg tends to be the kind of a representative, if you will, of the whole group down there. But let's find out what he was talking about, and what we think what he thinks we could be doing better in that area. And then somewhat tangential to that idea, when we were down at the event we just had, what was it called, the the home improvement marketplace, there were a couple of food trucks there, one being from Sneakers, and I forget which the other one was from, but it brought up some discussion with the owner of Sneakers about having what you see in some other cities are doing. I think Belmont does it on Wednesday night at their parking lot with the train station, having food trucks come in and having events where people can come and get a restaurant experience, if you will, out of a food truck. Where we might do that in San Carlos and attract people to the city that way and so forth. So I think that's something that we could work on.
So a couple of comments.
Sure, John.
One, in terms of a source, going back to the commercial property discussion, SAMCAR won't be of much help because there's not much of a focus at our layer.
That's residential? Okay.
Yeah. Probably best, and Mark probably knows this, just talking to the regional VPs at the Coldwell Bankers, those kind of guys.
Cassidy, sure.
Because they flow and they think in a completely different mode than we do at the residential level.
Got it.
And they also have people that specialize in certain categories of properties. There may be somebody that, their only thing is to lease to biotech, or their only thing is to lease to light manufacturing. So, whoever is doing that type of work, and again, Mark probably knows that piece. Going back to the restaurant piece, I agree, Matt. I think that this is an interesting time for us. You've got Redwood City putting 1,900 housing units online in a short order. And the downtown area is starting to attract some pretty interesting businesses. People at Baroni's, I think from what I've heard, this is just some urban myth, but it may be fact, they waited almost 20 years with the spot they had at Cafe Baroni's on Broadway to open up Vesta. Vesta and what's the other, Martin's Gastropub are really San Francisco class restaurants, and they're attracting that type of crowd. So with those 1,900 units, you can imagine demographically that's going to be very different than us too. So that may, that brings a different competitive edge to how we can compete for a given restaurant to come into San Carlos versus there. Saltbox is going to be a very interesting test of our ability to sustain that kind of restaurant. So anyway, a couple observations.
Okay. Karen?
So this whole category, number 2, the retention, expansion, attraction, promotion, to me and to a lot of the discussion that we've had on EDAC is really about staff having the time to build relationships with realtors, developers, business owners, prospective business owners, to learn lessons, to be opportunistic, to try and make things happen, to kind of hustle and try to make deals happen. And it's something that's very difficult to measure. And it's something that unless staff has the space to do it, it doesn't really get done. So there was a lot that was made of, a year or 2 ago, we came up with a list of potential businesses that from EDAC that we wanted to try to attract. To my knowledge, none of those have been called on. And we went through a marketing exercise where we did rebranding, we created some packets, which you see here, and they have to some extent been made available, but it hasn't been done in any sort of systematic way. And it's because the number 1 priority, which is new construction, has sucked up a lot of the bandwidth from staff. And so I just think it's important to make sure that there's a balance and that we're setting goals and we're looking for accountability in terms of hitting those goals in how much outbound activity we're doing, how opportunistic we're being, how many kind of relationships we're building, because it's those sort of marginal things that are difficult to measure and can happen somewhat, in a serendipitous manner, that a parcel becomes available, a guy who's looking for it, you can bring them together and you can bring somebody in. And so I think, I just want to make sure that we keep that focus and that part of the organization of the city humming, because I think it can pay a lot of dividends.
I think just 1 second. I think the ED coordinator is going to help that a lot.
Yeah, and I agree. And we're really thrilled that we have
that. I think it's going to help out. Yes, Mr. Olbert. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Grocott.
Yeah, I have a question for the EDAC guys, and especially maybe Cameron, because he's in the working for Netflix, tied up with Google and that kind of industry. One thing we were talking about at the council retreat the other day was this whole idea of communication, and getting stuff out there. And one of the things that I mentioned was I had just met with the owner of Today Sotheby's, and the direction they're going with that company is to really push on blogging and tweeting and that kind of thing, because people people don't read things, and they only read short stuff, and things are like this all the time. Information is just short, and you get it now, and if you don't get it, then you missed it. The possibility of having, we even talked a little bit about, do we have staff do some tweeting and just to get information out real quick on things? Like we're talking about availability of properties and things like that. Well, maybe we should have somebody who's tweeting that if there's anybody on the other end paying attention. I'd be interested to know what, Cameron and some of the younger guys, especially maybe John, Josh, might think about that. Not to disrespect anybody else, but
Like me?
like Bob.
So I think it's a good point that we should be using every communications technology available to be able to make, vacant property that's coming online, accessible. And we should feel that it's easier to find out what's available in San Carlos than any other city on the peninsula. And I think, to that point, basic communication technology is an excellent way to do that. We've also talked about, we've had other ideas around technology. We've talked about holding workshops for small business owners to be able to use technology to better market their businesses and communicate best practices. We've also even considered the idea of doing a campaign with residents to get residents to rate their favorite local businesses very highly on Yelp and OpenTable and other places, because people around the peninsula, when they're looking for a place to eat or a place to shop, they may not care about the location. They're just looking for things that are rated highly and well regarded, and so that might help drive additional businesses. But yeah, I think we should be using every technology available. I don't know if you guys want to raise anything.
John?
I think you have to take a pretty measured approach to any of that. A good example, and that's in that office. Bob Riddell was almost legendary in the way he used blogging to build his business, and he did phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I'm proud of the guy because I coached him when he was 11 anyway. So, but a guy like John Schroyer, who's legendary and probably one of the top brokers in the peninsula, if not in the state of California, he sends out notepads. Right? So it's not exactly the same. I think you have to take a very measured approach when it comes to perhaps outbound social media versus having a really good online presence and rely on as an information resource that we can push them to. Tweeting and so forth is really good. You've got to be careful about who your audience is. Mm-hmm. I farm in Emerald Hills. That's where I market. There's 1,800 homes up there, and I mail them constantly. Any online work I did there is pretty much wasted. They don't respond. They're not interactive. Bob found that the city of San Carlos folks work, and that's great. I'm not saying that that'll work necessarily for what you're intending to do, but be very conscious of what message you want to get out and who's going to respond. Because you may find, and establish some metrics too. I mean, for me, I'm a sales guy. I need leads. City of San Carlos, maybe you have to figure out some other metric. So do it in a measured way. I think it's important to be engaged. I mean, if you look at the buyers, and I'm going to get to this when we talk about housing and so forth. Our buyers are more people like Cameron. The last listing I sold, the guy was the Facebook, the head of travel, what have you. Right? They're not all Facebook people, but they are technology people, so they're engaged. So just be aware of who they are and how you engage them. Establish some metrics, because that can get out of control pretty fast. You can be doing too much of it, and it's not getting anywhere. You feel good. Hey, I'm tweeting all over the place, but you got 2 followers.
I don't even have that. Go ahead, yes.
Mr. Mayor,
sure, Keith.
The idea that John brought up here about understanding the audience when you're trying to get information out about a market, I think is particularly important when we're talking about things like tweeting or trying to identify what is available. A residential, somebody who's interested in a residential property or a sole proprietorship looking for a very small boutique shop or a small storefront, is going to have a very different approach as far as what they look for and how they compare information than somebody who's looking at a small to mid-sized firm or bringing a corporation in. An organization with a structured real estate approach is going to look for the untweet. They don't want to distill it down to 1 or 2 bytes. They want comparative information that they can look at across markets, across companies, and they want to make sure that they can compare things from both a financial perspective today and a long-term impact perspective. It's not 140 bits. It's probably going to be pretty deep. So it's probably a good idea from a perspective of generating interest, but it would have to be backed up by some rather in-depth financials and market study information. So again, to John's point, I think understanding both the intent in the audience, but also understanding what layers of information might be needed as immediate follow-up. One of the last things an organization, whether it's small, medium, or large scale, is going to want to find out is that you send out an info bite about something you have, and you can't respond to that phone call that comes across your desk 5 minutes later. If you can't do that, you've lost it.
Great, thank you. Yes, Thomas.
Well, I want to talk about small businesses, and so if we can move on to that, I'll
Go ahead, Thomas.
dive right in.
I've lost control of all of this, so
Okay.
this is pretty much, I'm flying by the seat of my pants anyway, so just go ahead.
We've all identified that one of the unique natures of the San Carlos industrial area is that it's comprised of largely small flex space units that small businesses can lease or own, and due largely to bandwidth constraints, I think a lot of the small businesses have been kind of put on the back burner. We've had a lot of big projects and not enough manpower to deal with them, or people power to deal with them, and I'm hoping that this new hire can spend a great deal of their time focusing on the small businesses in the coming year, and not get sucked into the big projects as has typically happened. It's been something we've identified in our 2007 plan. In 2010, we preserved the light industrial and flex space property when we redid our general plan. And moving forward, I'd like to see EDAC putting more programs together like we did with the marketplace that we just held for small businesses, because that is, in my view, a big pulse of the San Carlos industrial area.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Olbert. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to bring up a somewhat different point here when we're talking about some of the efforts that we're going to put in play here that are going to be augmented a bit. I tend to view, rightly or wrongly, part of the role of EDAC as a little bit like the business development department of a company that I worked at, or any company that I worked at. And so I hope that you folks will be doing some brainstorming and looking for ways to challenge us about whether or not we are doing enough. This is, in some sense, a similar, it's a bit of a riff on what I had said earlier. But for example, we talked about this new position we added. Okay, hypothetically, do you guys think that one new position is adequate? Do you think we should have done 2? Do you think we should have the one we hired plus 1 to focus on small business? Okay, I'm not trying to tell you what to suggest. I'm just saying that I hope that you will be spending some time thinking about those kinds of things, and frankly pushing back a little bit on staff and on us. Okay, saying, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? There's no guarantee that things will get approved, but part of the way this works is what gets brought forward tends to get discussed, but it has to get brought forward in the first place. And we can pull things, we can push things, but I hope that you folks will feel empowered to do that as well.
Yes, Ben.
So revenue issues aside, I think we are trying to create a business-friendly environment. And to do that, for EDAC, we need some priorities on what kind of businesses we really want to attract here. So we have our revenue goals, which is one side, but the other is the character of the city, and as you guys have pointed out, the quality of life. So we've identified hotels and restaurants and construction suppliers, and we identified high-tech companies, but we can't attract everybody. So to the point of we have to focus on down, it would be great to get some feedback of, consistent with the character of the city, these are the kinds of businesses we should do. Should we have more restaurants? We have a lot of great restaurants. It's unclear. And to the point of we have people driving out of the city, a lot of the people here are working in high-tech, but San Carlos is not a high-tech inferno. Is that consistent with the character of the city? Should we be attracting those? So if you guys can help us with that, that'd be great.
I think to some extent, because we're sort of an older city, if we had a lot of open space, I think we'd have a heck of a deal going here, because we could really, sort of pinpoint and match up. As Mark was saying, we have a lot of space on the east side, but a lot of it's older industrial type folks that are working. Now, whether they're going to be there in 5 years or 10 years, or whether they're going to be, the revolution will take care of them and they won't be able to do their product anymore, or they'll retire. I mean, there's a lot of older businesses over there. But having said that, they're still making a living and going along, and I think that's the difficult. That I see. I'm not trying to evade the question, but it's just real hard sometimes, because it's almost like a onesies. It's hard to say, well, this whole block we want to do this, because we don't have that block to work with, and that's difficult. It's on all of us. it's a difficult situation, so, yes, Mr. Grocott.
I think one way to look at that is to, I think it was John mentioned earlier that Redwood City's putting all this housing online, and Redwood City has other things that are going on. So we have neighbors that are doing things, and I don't know what kind of strategies they have, but I could see our strategy being, we're going to fill in where you guys are missing, and we're going to have small business, for instance, that's going to meet the needs of the high-tech workers and so forth. Like, for instance, South City, they've got all this biotech up there, but what do they have to support the people who work in biotech when they're not working? And that's one of the things that we've developed almost by, I don't think we necessarily thought about it strategically so much, but, we made that move years ago with parking, and all of a sudden we've got restaurants that are great and people come to. So I think that's one of the ways to look at it is what are your neighbors doing and what are they missing out on, and how can we think strategically to fill in the in-between spaces.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Collins.
Just building on what Matt was saying, one of the things I noticed is that, and I was just checking our website, we haven't talked about improving our website. As I've navigated it, it's a very good website, but I think it has so much more potential. It's great to talk about social media and how people are using Facebook and tweeting and that sort of thing, but those are just little bits of information. I think what I would like to see us do, and maybe EDAC could study this, is how to enhance the website so that it contains more data on housing and business opportunities, show what, as Matt says, what do neighboring cities have? Because I think if you're a business and you're trying to find out what's this town like and is it right for us to expand our business, some of the things they may want to know is what are the housing opportunities in neighboring cities? What other kinds of businesses are in neighboring cities? What kind of atmosphere are we considering putting ourselves into? So I still think that a lot of people do basic research. I'm sure they do on the internet, and one of the things they look at, which is a constant, is our website. And I think we were one of the first cities, I believe, to have a website, and I think we've done a wonderful job. It's been enhanced, but I think that we've just scratched the surface of our potential. And I think the more data that we have, there's a whole section in here on just some basic data on our city. The number of schools and the number of houses and the population and some weather data and that sort of thing. But there's a lot more data that we could be putting on. I'm sure we all get emails from that Data San Carlos. It's a local guy that just puts together all kinds of non-biased, interesting data. It'd be nice if we could incorporate that information and also maybe do some more of our own so that if we're trying to attract not only business but developers who are maybe thinking of putting more housing and people who are thinking of moving here, I think we can enrich our website a lot more. And I know you guys have a full plate, but it would be nice, it would be something really to explore a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we move on to the next one? We can always come back to some of these if we have extra time. The third one is workforce housing. I don't know if EDAC gets into too much workforce housing or if it gets into too much at all on that. It was already mentioned about whether people, whether, like you said, whether it's jobs or housing, people are coming or going. So, comments? Cameron?
Well, so we had a discussion at our last meeting, and maybe I'll summarize it, which is that, the theory is, and it's based on some of these outreach meetings that we've had to some of the large employers here, that having an adequate workforce that's close to business is an issue and has a big impact on how successful these businesses are. And the question that we have is, to what degree is that a case? Is that the case? And to what degree can you draw a straight line between investing in additional housing units and more economic activity at the end of the day? So we think it's an interesting theory, and it's based on a lot of good evidence, and we want to kind of talk about it, study it, and see, as Mark put, consistent with the 2015 housing element, what could be the revised new construction housing strategy in a sort of economic development direction? But I would say that we haven't had a substantial amount of conversation on EDAC, and it's something that I don't think at this point we have a huge amount of expertise on, but it's something we want to talk about more.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody wants to add.
John had a comment, I think.
So Matt's observation about the workforce and where it goes is dead on, and I think what it points out is, and maybe we take it for granted, but any solution that's centered around single-family housing is out the door. The amount of pressure on that type of housing stock will always remain strong, and the folks that are buying the properties now are probably not going to be working in light manufacturing in San Carlos or anywhere nearby. They're commuting to the city, they're commuting south. Our opportunity, if we have one, in terms of, and I suppose it's a balance between providing housing so that local businesses feel that they can move in versus just simply having more housing available, is going to be multifamily in places and filling in pockets and so forth, which we don't have a lot of. Redwood City used some huge spaces. The old Dodge dealership on Veterans, the place right across from Pete's there, and that's some serious volume that they're doing. We can't match that. I don't think we'll never get there. No. So I think we have to think about that in terms of it'd be great simply to have more housing, and match up and provide more lower cost alternatives. The pressure on condos right now is ridiculous. They're getting bid up in Foster City and Redwood Shores at a ridiculous rate. So I suppose I would suggest that the perspective on housing be probably less about serving those that are looking to build businesses here. The outlying communities may be doing that for us.
Okay. I know I was down at Redwood City this morning, and I drove by, and I didn't realize I think it's like 8 or 10 stories. That's right by the railroad tracks there at Broadway, south of Broadway. Is it 8? You counted them. Good. That's unbelievable. And they're going to put another one behind the theater where that parking lot is. That's going to be a huge, and you're right, we don't have any space like that. And quite honestly, if we did, I don't think we'd want it because we're just not, it's not conducive to our area. 3 or 4 would be just about tops that we can go. But so you're absolutely right. And comparing us to Redwood City is hard sometimes because they're 2.5 times bigger and they've got a lot of that space downtown. So anyway.
One other quick comment.
Sure.
Which is, so the context of our conversation about housing is the recognition that housing has many implications for the city. It has implications for the schools. It has implications for just demand for resources. It has implications for the demographics, the character of the city, all sorts of things. And so I think our goal over the next year or so is to try and bring the economic development aspect to that larger conversation. But we understand that housing in general is a broader topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ron.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Cameron, because it's been one of my interests for a long time. I think we have a huge need for rental housing, and I would like us to study, particularly the El Camino corridor. There's a lot of tired businesses along there. That whole area really is ripe for our own redevelopment and creating more workforce housing in that area. But it would obviously, as John Sealing says, there's not much, not really an opportunity to put housing, single-family houses there. You can't put condos. I suppose maybe you could, but I think we need a lot more rental housing and a lot more mixed-use developments. There's been a lot of criticisms of 1001 Laurel, but the concept is still the right concept. So we just need to make sure that we do it right. But I'd love to see all available places in the city that are candidates for more rental housing explored.
Yeah, a couple of things. Before we get into the housing element, which is mentioned here, that we've got to get to that at some point, I think it'd be interesting to have EDACs look at the different kinds of housing, and something that I know it got booted at the time, but I remember John Baer came forward at one time, and he wanted to put housing out on Industrial Road at a certain site. And like I said, it got trash canned. But I think there's still an idea there, and I think it'd be interesting for EDAC, for one of our commissions, to look at that. And also, when I went with staff on one of these outreach things, housing was mentioned, and it was mentioned in more than one way. One way was that that particular company has people come for internships, and the need for people to have temporary housing in San Carlos. Now, that when it was brought up, it was said, well, HIP does some of that, but I think that's a little different animal myself, and I think if there's something that we could develop there, it would be good for our city to have some kind of network that companies like the one we visited could plug into, because we have a lot of, John probably knows this, there's a lot of older people who have nice homes, their kids are gone, and they've got 2 or 3 bedrooms that just sit there because they're not in a position, like Mark was saying earlier, to let go of their home. They don't want to move on, but there it is. They've got this empty real estate, so to speak. The other thing that I think would be worth looking at and thinking about is just this whole term of workforce housing. For San Carlos, at least, to punt that term. It's not a very, in my mind, it's almost become a derogatory term. And I think to come up with something else, and for us to talk about, I don't know what the term would be, but something that just talks about us providing all variety of housing that people can have a choice in. The other thing, and I'll shut up after this, on this topic anyways, the other thing that got mentioned at the meeting I went to with the particular company was the idea of people wanting a place that they can, that younger people can get a hold of. They're not quite ready for the single-family home or even necessarily the condo, but they don't want to move into rental housing as you think of rental housing. So I think there's some things that we've got to tackle there to meet choices for people. And calling it workforce housing, I don't know, for me, it doesn't do it.
Thank you. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Matt brings up a very good point. I really don't care what you call it. To me, more housing is important, and we can argue all day what we call it. That's immaterial. One thing I thought about, though, and this does require identifying it, and that is that we're going to need more senior housing as well. I'm not just speaking for myself, but
you're speaking for Bob.
I'm going to die in my house. I'm speaking of poor Bob.
Thanks, Ron.
But I think San Mateo County, if we do a demographic study, I can't prove this, but I wouldn't be surprised if a demographic study showed that we have an older population. In fact, a session I went to at a progress seminar actually stated that while Mountain View and San Francisco are getting younger, the Mid-Peninsula is getting older, and I think that's probably a real fact. So when we look at our housing element, I think that's one of the things that we should talk about is, are we providing enough senior housing? I think that's going to be a very important element because, let's face it, the baby boomers are now starting to retire. A lot of us have a lot of money. I may not be one of those, but when I say us, I mean the group in general. Be a good idea to make sure that we keep that thought in our discussion on housing.
We'll get Mark and then John.
Ron, you reminded me, I forgot to mention from the Congestion Management and Environmental Quality Subcommittee of CCAG, there was a presentation. They had 2 interesting factoids. They were not about individual communities. They're about the entire San Mateo County area. I believe it's the 65 and older cohort population is expected to grow by 70% over the next 20 years. And currently, the fastest growing age group population-wise in the county is 85 years or older.
Thanks for sharing.
So to follow on the senior piece of things, perhaps at least we keep this idea in mind that, yes, look at structured housing options for seniors, and there are very good ones already on the peninsula. but also for helping families convert their homes or build out their homes in ways that they can keep their seniors at home. Younger people caring for older people. I mean, that's what society used to be like. Now we've modularized all these different segments of our lives. My folks are in their 70s. You met my folks the other day.
Mm-hmm.
My youngest brother is living at home with them now. The house is big enough to do that. They've modified it so that, and there, I believe there's, I don't know if it's still a policy in the county or throughout most of California to allow for 640 square foot accessory buildings, almost really for that very fact. So we should perhaps relook at that and look at how we can shape housing construction policy to accommodate families that want to keep seniors at home, or the seniors want to stay at home and bring their kids home to care for them. I think that element has to be brought into the market.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
One comment to John's point, being in the business, 640, I think, is a number we got to look at because it's too small. It's simply too small. And to a comment that Mark made earlier about greasing the wheels for getting turnover, this topic about senior housing or what John's talking about fits into both categories. Both those fit into that category because when you allow some property expansion, at least that portion of it's going to get reassessed. And when you create senior housing, I know it wasn't even called senior housing, but when the structure was built across the street, there are a lot of people who sold their homes, not a ton, but I mean it did happen where people sold their homes. I know people that are thinking of it now. One couple lives up on Melanie, and they're thinking, sell our home and move into the haciendas. So that helps loosen things up and get the turnover you're looking for.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to build on that, the housing, because when we're talking about senior housing, some of you are making assumptions this is for people who, have fallen and can't get up. I think we also need to be considering active retirees who necessarily don't want to be tied down to a property they have to be concerned about the maintenance of. So either they are looking at moving into a condo where the maintenance is taken care of by the homeowners association, or they're willing to rent in exchange for the security and the lack of the regular maintenance that they do. So I want to make sure we keep that in with the other more supportive and assistive living approaches. And also, when we start looking at what people can do in their backyards, there are a lot of options out there. There's one particular product that's called Med Cottages, and these are essentially pre-built, ready to be assembled. They're designed to be hooked up to the existing homeowners' utilities, not having a separate hookup. And they range from, there's 3 models, 288 square feet, 299 square feet, and 605 square feet. So there's, there are some different sizes depending on the size of the lot, as well as what folks want to have happen with them. And they generally also have a way of communicating from those units into the main home. And so there's, I can't remember what the limitations are when we did the zoning update, but I believe we did allow for additional units to be built in people's backyards, but I just can't remember what the square footage cap is. But I think that's something that would be great to take a look at.
Maybe we can go 2 or 3 stories on some of those, because it sounds like an awfully small place, but you're right. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's amazing. You don't need that much space for those people who have lived like in New York City.
I guess I never
Just a
lived there.
quick comment on this. I think Cameron started this conversation off with, I think EDAC's goal in all this is to become educated on all the housing stuff that's out there. I think moving out here from the Midwest, this conversation is happening in lots of cities around the country who have an established, possibly older population. How to keep them in town is a valuable part of the experience, right? To have a diversity of people and ages and all that. So I think there's a lot to learn. I think that this is where EDAC hopes that staff can help us get educated. And I think that's why we listed this as a priority. Not that we have a great idea of how to solve this, but that we want to become educated on because we think it's a big factor in economic development.
Okay, great. Glad you did. All right, let's move on to number 4, ongoing and other administrative. Any comments about some of the items that are on that list, or?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So I see this bucket as really things that need to be done to support the things that are above it, and particularly 1 and 2. But I would like to make one broader point, which is what's put in here is like quarterly economic development status reports to council, and it goes under the broader heading of how do we measure economic development, and how do we know we're doing the right things, and how do we get better at it, and how do we make sure that what we're doing are the best things to do. And it's a very difficult thing. It's something that we've grappled with on EDAC for a long time. It's very difficult to understand whether a business moves to town because it's something that the city did, or it's that business was going to move to town, anyway. It's hard to tell whether or not sales tax is going up because the overall economy is going up, and how much is the city doing. So, but I would say, back to the point I made at the beginning, that everything that we're doing now is traded off against the general fund. And given that, I think that we should collectively, as a city, be talking about these things in terms of what's the return overall to the city. So one thing that we talked about when we did the home improvement marketplace is that it required, we were given a $15,000 grant by the city for marketing, and in order for us to return $15,000 in tax revenue back to the city coffers, the event had to generate $1.5 million in additional revenue. And we thought, hey, that's actually an achievable goal given the size of the industry. So I would like to see that, as part of general staff administrative activities, that we're requiring a kind of a higher level of measurement and accountability for what we're doing.
I would agree with your basic premise that you certainly wouldn't want to spend money to get nothing back. I think, but I think sometimes you have to spend money, and it's like cultivation, and that $1.5 million may not have come in on August 24th, but it certainly may generate on and on. So I don't want to get too tied down to.
No, I think that point is very well taken, and I don't think we're going to get to the place where we know we did these specific activities and generated this amount of revenue, but I do think that we should be, doing a better job of tracking what activity we're actually doing, and what do we think the net results will be, and then, did we actually see the results that we expected?
Sure. Mark?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I too want to just raise a cautionary note. One of my senses is that public agencies, by their nature, tend to become very good at reporting on things, okay? And when I read this, and don't get me wrong, I want to be kept up to date. I particularly want to be kept up to date when there look like there are resource constraints where those of us who are holding the purse strings, if we allocated more funds, we'd get bigger bangs. But to me, what I really want to see is activity. What I want to see is activity and calling, whether it's calling or generating leads or what have you, not sort of studying the thing to death. My sense is, again, drawing the analogy with business development, business development functions always have to do combinations of lots of research and thinking and outreach efforts. And if you sort of veer to either one side or the other, things don't work out so well. And it's definitely a game of odds. To the mayor's last point, I completely agree with that. You'll never know what it was that actually generated the lead. And to a certain extent, spending time trying to figure out what it was is a pointless exercise. If anything, maybe what EDAC would like to do is to take as a charge to try and figure out, well, what's a reasonable level of things that we ought to use in terms of monitoring. What's a reasonable set of resource evaluations that we ought to be following, and then stick to that. Not kind of go hog wild on that. Because again, to me, I think the ultimate thing is it's activity, it's outreach, it's touching people, it's the sales side of things. We historically have tended to do a fair amount of marketing, not so much sales, and I think we need to do more sales.
Can I make a comment to that? Sure. So I agree, but I do think that what I'm suggesting is that we measure that activity. So in the case of business recruitment, we did a lot of conversation about, well, we're going to go out there and start recruiting businesses, and then we didn't really do it. And we've come back at EDAC and said, well, hey, have we called any businesses this week? And how frequently are we going to? And when we really pushed on it, it was, well, we don't really have the resources to do it because we're tied up with Wheeler and other things. And what came out of that is, okay, well, I think we should hire an economic development coordinator who's going to go out and do that stuff. And I think that was a good outcome. But I hesitate. I completely agree with you that you don't know which of the leads or which of the calls is going to generate that business. But I would say that we should believe in aggregate that over the course of a year or multi-year effort that we will see results, or we shouldn't do it. And we should be measuring that activity and seeing at the end of the day, did it yield things? Not, did a specific piece of activity bring in a new business? But hey, we went out and we tried to talk to 100 businesses. How long did that take? How much did that cost? And at the end of the day, did we get new businesses? And what could we learn from that?
I guess.
Okay.
All right. No. Okay.
I just don't want a ping pong match here. I just want to make sure everybody gets, I can make the last word. So I got the last word. We're on. Any more comments on 4?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One is more of a question, and that is with the demise of the RDA that we mentioned before, it seems to me it changes the role a little bit, at least, of your commission. So I see 7 people here. Your opinion about, you're one of the larger commissions, like Planning Commission is 5, Council's 5, et cetera. You guys feel like you're big enough, not big enough? You cover the bases enough? Is there anything we should change with EDAC itself?
I'm going to speak rather parochially here. My experience from being on EDAC now for several years is that the ability to evaluate, discuss, debate, generate ideas, evolve them, trash them, whatever, is not lacking. I think the challenge that we have is in moderating our enthusiasm and interest to the point where staff can act in accordance with the demands on them. Okay. My sense is that that's the gating factor for us. And much as we see with the priorities that have been brought to the table here tonight, the discussions that we've kind of distilled, the dehydration of the topics that's gone on, we could add more material to the table. There are items 6 through 10 that didn't make it here, right? But it wouldn't be, from our perspective and the discussions and debates we had, it wouldn't be prudent to put them on the table because for some reason or another we feel that they wouldn't generate the reasonable return or have the reasonable degree of success or achievement that these might. So that would be my take of what we've experienced. The gating factor is not our ability to come up with ideas, it's our ability to ensure that we don't overwhelm the staff and the city with them.
Okay. The other comment I had is relative to the event, the one event that we've done, and I think it went well, and I think it falls under this category since it's administrative. I think it's important with events like that, and I'd kind of put it on you guys as much as staff. Evaluate what happened, what were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, how can we do this better, and not to just dwell on anything negative, but for instance, I know one thing is I know there were some realtors there, but I know a lot of realtors who knew nothing about it, and so that's not good because they're in that industry and they could have very well been there. So just thinking about how to promote it. One thing I would think of is, Cameron mentioned the $15,000. I don't know what it got spent on, but putting on an event like that, maybe you hire an event coordinator, promoter. In
this case, we did.
Okay.
The guy who has done the Night of Holiday Lights on Laurel Street and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think we did a pretty good job in terms of marketing, but there were definitely pockets that we didn't hit. And I think that's a big opportunity for next year.
I think it should also be mentioned that that event was largely the success it was due to the work of EDP and the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce. EDAC actually only had, other than soliciting the funds, there was not really a weekly or monthly involvement on EDAC's part.
Ron?
Yeah, I think staff's probably going to hate me when I say this, but We've been talking about all these things tonight, and I'm wondering, having been on EDAC and knowing that what your sort of your workflow is, and one of the things that we talked about that is a big deal is the housing aspect of it. And I got to thinking, I'm wondering if we might at some point need a housing development advisory commission, or do you collectively think that you could still manage that with all the other things that we have going on? I think one works with the other. I mean, one generates the other, but I realize that having another commission would probably create a lot more work for staff, but maybe having if we ever develop enough funds, maybe we could have somebody that could take on that challenge. I mean, what do you think? What does anybody think?
Through the chair. So when we did the last housing element, it was around the time that we were doing the general plan up as well. We had we created an ad hoc housing advisory committee. It was not a commission. It was ad hoc. It wasn't something that was going to be permanent, but they had a purpose. They had two purposes. One was to work on the housing element, and the other was the update of our BMR ordinance, which we did subsequently. And it consisted of members of the GPAC, and it consisted of members of EDAC, because it was part of EDAC's charge. And then we also brought in some other citizens, as well as some residential developers, to get their perspective as well. So it actually was a very well-functioning committee, because there were a lot of different voices. And I would suggest doing the same when we do the housing element update.
Okay.
I have a question. There was a time where we were 9 members. Are we now officially just 7? Has that change been made?
9 when I was on.
It is still officially 9 members, but we did pare it back to 7. And there was another. The history of EDAC, there was an EDAC PAC that was part of the redevelopment agency, had a PAC, a project area committee, associated with an economic development committee. I believe that was like 15 members when it was first created, and you can imagine what those meetings might have been like. That got pared back to 9, and then in recent years we pared EDAC back to 7, although that's not in the code. That's the way we've been operating it, similar to other commissions.
One of the reasons behind that is that we were having difficulty getting quorum on occasion with 9 members, and I think as we pared it back to 7, it's been much less of an issue.
Just a comment, I think 7 is fine. 9 might be a lot, but I don't know what other members think.
So we talked about number 4. Let's jump over to number 5. If there's anything that anybody has a comment or question on 5. And by the way, Josh, I haven't forgotten what your comment. We're gonna give you some opinion here.
So I would just say that I argued against having a number 5.
I mean, you don't have much time?
And the reason is, to many of the comments that have been said here, we haven't had enough resources. So, the previous economic development plan had 26 initiatives or something on it. And so we've sort of had an ongoing conversation with staff where we're trying to pare things down, and new initiatives keep appearing. All of them are great ideas, but I just feel that we collectively need to be disciplined so that we're spending the resources on the things that are likely to have the maximum value. And that's not to say that we can't take things off the list and bring other things on, but the experience post dissolution of the RDA is that we just haven't had the bandwidth to do a lot.
Okay. Other comments?
I would actually, not to disagree, but I'll just give I'm actually a proponent of this particular component, simply because some of these ideas are ideas that were in the 2007 and 2010 EDP plan. And to just dismiss them as not important, I don't think that's a good idea. I think what we need to do is just remember that they're there. We don't need to spend any time on them, but just spending even a half hour a year, one of our meetings as an agenda item, just to make sure we're not leaving out any low-hanging fruit that we might be able to tackle. I think that's a worthwhile exercise.
John?
So I'm going to go out on some real thin ice here, but it's a topic that I think is, and it's a category of tax revenue that's significant and growing, and no pun intended, in the United States, but I think that we should be open to the idea long-term to a marijuana dispensary. The tax revenues that these towns are getting, Vallejo themselves, they budgeted $250,000 for their tax revenue in 2012. The first 3 months, they had $175,000 in their coffers. Denver, Washington, Oregon are seeing massive influxes of tax revenue in this space. San Francisco County, San Jose, or Santa Clara County are obviously doing very well in that respect. San Mateo County hasn't gone there yet. We'll be a follower. Maybe culturally it doesn't fit for some people, but at some point in time you got to think about that. You know, up and down the peninsula, most of the communities are pretty much the same. And you know, a lot of friends of mine would probably laugh at me. I went to Chico State, roll their eyes right away anyway. But I'm dead serious. If you've seen how these businesses are run, how well they're run, how well they're regulated, it's something to be open to. Anyway, a thought.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Grocott.
I'm going to target on the last bullet point on this, the targeted advertising, promotion, and extend the City of Good Living brand. I know we took some hits on this, and you guys are probably tired of me bringing it up, but when I brought up before about having stuff that we can give away to our commissioners and that's available to our city staff and so forth with the, you know, the T-shirts and the hats and all that, that took a big hit in the paper, okay? And it took a big hit because it was misunderstood. It went sideways. And but I think it's something that we should still think about. And I actually got, after that event, after that council meeting, I got 3 phone calls from people saying, I liked your idea. I would love to be able to purchase those kinds of things for myself and promote San Carlos. I'm proud of my city, and I want to be able to wear things, apparel, and so forth that says I'm from San Carlos. And I think we're really missing the boat. The negative we got from the community was they thought we were trying to give stuff away to people who could buy it. You know, our city staff can well afford to buy themselves a T-shirt or a hat, and I think they felt kind of the same way about, you know, gee, this looks like it's stuff for staff and the council. And that's where I say it went sideways. But I think the real message is having stuff that's available to everybody, be it staff, be it commissioners, council members, and the public, that they can, you know, wear around town, wear when they go out of town, and go to places that say, I'm from San Carlos and I'm proud of that. And I think we're missing the boat if we don't make that available.
Mr. Grocott, I agree that will be the last time you'll say that. It's the 3rd time I've heard it in the last week. But anyway, other comments on this this stuff?
I'd like to say one more thing. In response to Mark's comments earlier, this is really our opportunity to be the business development arm of San Carlos. And that's why I feel it should be important to spend some time seeing if there are other business ideas that we can bring forth to you in the next budget cycle.
Okay. Josh had asked a question earlier, and I think it's very well taken on that question, whether folks would just like to, from the council, would just like to give a couple, 3 comments or ideas of their top 2 or 3 items. Ms. Clapper?
Yes.
That way at least you'll hear, and I don't think it's going to be consistent, but you're going to hear it, so maybe it will be.
Having had the opportunity of attending quite a few of the EDAC committees meetings, commission meetings, and hearing the process, I really want to commend staff, Mark Zawicki, and the commission. The process by which they actually work the plan that they have has really been great to see, both while I was on the Planning Commission and on the council. And this is just an extension of that. So I like what I see here because I know the thought process and the diligence that all of you brought to this. I guess my big concern is kind of building on the thought just mentioned about, you know, how can this be the business development arm of the city? It makes me think, what do we need to do? What does the council need to do in order to make sure we have the resources to support this plan? We know that we don't have the redevelopment money anymore, but what specifically do we need to do at the council level? I like what you've got here. I just want to make sure we figure out how to make this happen. And I think you've done a great job of taking it beyond just being an advisory commission and turning it into action. I really liked the home improvement marketplace. And so I would like to make sure that those kinds of ideas can continue to actually take place and not just be something on paper that's a good idea, but how can we move it forward? So I don't know if we'll be able to discuss that in this venue, but I would hope that it would be something that would be on the agenda for the next commission meeting.
Mr. Collins?
Well, just my quick note's probably pretty obvious from my comments. I would love to see us continue to work on housing development ideas. Obviously, ideas that we could pursue, at least in getting a hotel. I think that's. I've been told that we're close, so I'm very excited about that possibility. The other thing is that I wrote down advertising of our city, but more marketing of the city, more website development. One of the ideas that came up was signage. I think that the directional signage is important. I met with an East Side Cafe owner last week who felt that a lot of people don't know that he's there, and he's right on Old County Road. And I think we ought to look more at maybe developing an East Side business directory, and maybe some signs along Holly Street that point to some of the interesting businesses and eating establishments that are along Old County Road. So these are just little things that are just building on what we've been working on and what you guys have been working on all along.
Mr. Grocott?
Just a couple things. One, I liked what John said earlier about taking measured approaches, and I look to EDAC to come up with ideas where you can try things out in a measured approach and see if they work, and if they don't work, have those kind of recommendations. I really liked what Thomas said earlier about the focus on small business. I agree with you. If you just look at our economy as a nation, the strongest employment numbers come from small business. And I think if we looked at it in San Carlos, it's probably true as well. And so focusing on small business, what can we do to help them to either stay here or grow here or whatever? I think you're straight on with that. And thirdly and lastly, for me, one of the things I look at EDAC for is, city staff is city staff. They think like government, and that's not said in a negative way, but they do. And I think the thing that EDAC brings to the table, because you guys all are in business, like Thomas owns his own small business and that kind of thing, you're in the business world, and so what you bring to the city when you come into City Hall and you deal with economic development and so forth is thinking like a business. So those are my comments.
Mr. Wilbert?
I would, I guess the general feedback I would give you is not on any of the specifics that you have there, which are fine, but kind of following a little bit along on that discussion that was starting to happen before when it got truncated. I think it's important that you help staff and us provide a degree of focus on our economic development activities. When I look at the list of things that's there, my visceral reaction is it's too big for the resources that we have. And that doesn't mean that any of the ideas on it are bad. I think, as somebody said, all the ideas are good. And in fact, there are many other good ideas that aren't on that list. But we either need to petition, argue for more resources, or maybe what we need to do is to try things for a certain period of time and then try something else if that doesn't work, or try a third thing, try a fourth thing, and kind of rotate through. That's also something that many successful business development functions do, is they have a focus for a while and they mine that, and it works or it doesn't, and then they go mine something else. So I'd encourage you to think about things along that way rather than necessarily trying to be a thin film of water on top of the entire effort, because that may just dry up.
I think my comments would be that I believe number 2 is really the most important part of all of this, economic development. I mean, that's the name of the committee. I think the larger items, the larger housing items, even though I agree with Mr. Collins that we need, housing is very important, I think the larger housing items, I would say, would be a secondary or tertiary or fourth situation. But the workforce, or whatever we'd like to call that, I think that goes hand in hand with the economic development part of it. I think the other part is that in dealing with staff, I think there has to be two-way conversation. And if for some reason that we aren't having enough of these meetings, that folks have to just pick up the phone or do whatever and stop people on the street and say, hey, what about this and what about this, and we're working on this stuff. And I think we get it through staff, but there may be issues that sometimes hit roadblocks for whatever reasons, and I think we need to know that they are. So, other comments, final comments? Anybody? Staff? Anybody?
I had a couple of other
Go ahead.
questions. I'm interested in knowing I'm assuming at some point EDAC will be taking a look at the information out of the parking study and be involved in that and be able to add some perspective from an economic point of view. So I would hope that we would get some feedback from them on that. And I would be interested in hearing more in the future about what EDAC's point of view is about circulation without automobiles. Looking at the complete streets policy and pedestrian access. How does that fit in or support the economic conditions in our city for the existing businesses? Since we're talking about putting a fair amount of effort into retaining and expanding the existing businesses, to make sure that we're thinking about those things, not just from a transportation and circulation point of view, but how does it build up and maintain that part of the character of this city where we have successful businesses who want to stay here. So I would hope that would be part of a future discussion. And I would, on a longer-term basis, I'd like to hear some thoughts on what are the risks, or maybe I should be stating it as pros and cons to be looking at it from both sides, but the risks of what's currently happening with property values going up that may put pressure on transitioning some of the industrial and commercial properties to be transitioned over to residential. What is the likelihood of that happening? How do we want to be taking that into consideration? Do we want to make that easier, make it more difficult? I would really like to hear some perspective from EDAC in the future on that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, go ahead, Cameron.
I was just going to say thanks for setting this up, and I think all of us on EDAC get excited about economic development and are optimistic about the opportunities that exist in San Carlos, both just to generate more business, more revenue, and also just to use business opportunity to increase quality of life, create more great places for people to shop and dine, et cetera. And so I'm excited that you guys are excited, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Well, thank you. As I said before, you guys did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, you and staff on this document and all the items you came up with. So thank you for donating your time and your expertise on all these items. Yes, Mark.
Just for clarity's sake, what would you like to see come back, if anything at all, from this in terms of what, like a formal economic development plan, a report, a summary of what we've discussed? My suggestion is that we have something much more simple than what we've had in the past, and it's something that can sit on the website, very easily identifiable and readable. And I would think it's the items 1 through 4. And the items that were in that category 5 are something that we keep on hand for EDAC meetings and when we do updates about whether any of these things should percolate up and get into the plan. That would be my suggestion, at least.
Well, that's reasonable. Any other comments on that from the council or EDAC?
I would concur with that based on the members of EDAC taking a look, at their reactions and their notes from this meeting and working with you to put together what the final plan looks like, if it would be anything different than what we've seen tonight. But I don't know what the rest of the council members think about what the next steps are.
Anything else? think it's a good idea that Karen had, and you can work with whomever to, I think KISS is better, KISS method, so. Okay, well, I, again, appreciate all the time that you folks put in, and staff and city council for coming tonight, and this meeting's adjourned.